Hi, I'm Brent Johnson, and today I've come to Brighton, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. This is St. John's Seminary Chapel, and this building, beautiful building, was opened in 1901, and in 1902, Hook-Hastings installed a pipe organ in the rear gallery. That organ suffered throughout the 20th century and needed some work, so in 2015, the Andover Organ Company finished a rebuild and restoration of that organ. Ryan Bartosiewicz is the president of Andover today. He was part of getting the organ back to life, and he tells us about that job.
Well, here we are, the 500th rebuild or restoration in the company's history. It was a very exciting project, and I was very happy to be a part of it. There was a long story here. When we got to the organ, it was dead and hadn't been unplayable for a number of years. The console had been replaced in the 1940s, and when that console finally died, it remained silent and was replaced. The organ was still sitting here, but they brought in a one-manual Simmons from, I think, around 1850. And that organ boldly led the congregation here at the seminary while this organ was unplayable. They had removed the console, and the Simmons sat basically right where we are right now. This was an interesting situation. It's always a challenge when the organ that you're going to rebuild and or restore is unplayable. No electricity, no wind, you have no idea what anything sounds like. You can't sit there and play it and get an idea of its faults and what it does well before you pack it all up and ship it to the shop. So we've done a few of those, and it's a little nerve-wracking at times, but sometimes the best results come out of a little bit of uncertainty and unknown. And certainly that was the case here. In 1902, Hook-Hastings was definitely in a transitory period. I mean, the Hook brothers were gone, and they were sort of entering that final third phase of the company, well, fourth phase of the company, where the decline began, and then, of course, in the 1920s, it all came to a crashing end. So they were sort of straddling the divide. On the one hand, they were still building small two-manual tracker organs that they had been so good at through the years. But in their larger instruments, they were experimenting with electro-pneumatic action, and they had their own design for primaries and chests, and they were less good at that, to say the least, and they were notoriously unreliable, especially after years of heating. In an institution like this, you have heat cycling in the winter, and then it's hot in the summer and dry, and So the chests had failed spectacularly and rendered the organ unplayable. And they were in very bad shape. In addition to that, the primary system is completely unworkable and nearly unrestorable. And even if we were to have restored them, they wouldn't have been any good anyway, because they were they weren't great when they were new. So what do you do? And kind of when you're restoring an old building nowadays, you have to make decisions. You should respect the history, but also sometimes you have to update things a little bit sympathetically for modern use and reliability. And so that's what we did here. By accepting that the old organ was a smaller two-manual that was specifically for accompanying the chant, and they wanted something that would be handling more hymn singing and more of the repertoire, and a bigger organ, more flexible. So we take the core of it, and then you sympathetically expand it. And the way we did that here is originally most of the organ was in this lovely case. And we decided to remove the pedal division, which at that time was really just a small double open and a Borden. And we kind of sent it up to behind the organ into the gallery, and that opened up some possibilities in the organ. We could move the trumpet, for example, on the grate off of the main chest and onto a side chest, and that allowed to add some additions to the grate. It opened up the space behind the grate and below the swell for a brand new division, and so we designed a choir division and populated it with some old, some new, and voila, now you have a third division. And then expanded the swell by building out the swell box a little bit and allowed to take the reeds off of the main chest and put it on a unit chest at the back, thereby allowing some borrows and some extensions. And suddenly you have this kind of tame two-manual, a meat and potatoes organ kind of, and now you've spiced it up and allowed it to do things that they may not have dreamed of back then, while still keeping it basically original. So if you wanted to pare it down and play the core of the organ, you can still do that here, but you can also do other things. So also when you're doing a project like this, you have to consider some of the visual things as well. I mean, you can't just spend all your time on the stuff that's behind the case. And of course it needed a new console, and we decided to build a replica console. There was once a Hook in St. Ignatius Loyola in New York City, quite a famous one in fact. However, the pipework from that organ in the chest ended up, of all places, in a church in Lawrence, Massachusetts, a mile from the shop. And the original console for that organ is there. And that is the console that we based this console off of. This is nearly a direct replica of that console with the elliptically curved jambs with the oblique knobs and the lyre music rack. So we're very fortunate to have that historical example right down the street from the shop where we could take detailed measurements of the carvings and all the dimensions, and this is what resulted, and very happy with this. I think it's turned out better than I had ever expected. So then, of course, we need to do something about the case. The case woodwork was sort of two-toned. The top or crown was a lighter color because it was added later and had aged differently, so it was a bit bizarre. And then the pipes had been re-stenciled at some point and then painted and re-stenciled, and they were sort of Victorian and didn't really make much sense with this wonderful chapel we have here. So we brought in Mary Lou Davis, and she has worked with us before on pipe facades and is an expert in 19th century decoration. And she applied different treatments to the case to get the finish to match, all in like one piece, and then she designed and re-stenciled the pipes in a manner that would reflect the beautiful chapel.
James Kennerly, who is the municipal organist in Portland, Maine, where the Kochmar organ is here today, and he takes us through this organ. Now, Ryan knows the instrument better than anybody, so he and James will demonstrate this organ for us.
So I think maybe we should start in the grate and
Super.
go from there.
Yeah.
So the first thing, of course, is we have an 8-foot open diapason.
Yep.
This is original. Always liked how it had a little bit of body, but also there's a little bit of texture.
Yeah.
It's
Very
interesting,
melodic.
that actually was in the first iteration of this organ.
Yep.
Before it was rebuilt. That was a tidbit bigger in the bass. And in order to draw the chorus slightly closer together, it's rescaled a pipe or two, but it's essentially original.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, of course, we have the 4-foot octave, and that's just bone stock, not changed, original. Sits atop the open pretty well. Yeah, lovely. And then we have, of course, the 2-foot 15th. That's also original. sits under those a little bit, not too scary. And the mixture is new, and we tried to have the mixture be more about texture and less about power. And so then when you stack it all up, you get this. Yeah. Very good, thank you. Yeah. There is a 16-foot board, but it's borrowed from the swell, so when we get there, we'll discuss it. And then there's 2 flutes on the grate. The Doppel flute is original, and it's quite a fine example in this room
Certainly is.
of a good Doppel flute. Plump and luscious.
Yeah.
The only addition to the flutes on the grate is the 8-foot Spitz flute, and the Dulciana from the choir now used to reside here, but we felt that the Dulciana would make more sense in the choir, and then we had this Spitz flute in stock, which is a lovely mild taper, and it actually has turned out to be a great accompanying flute.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. And then, of course, the trumpet is original. It's now on a separate chest so that it can be used in a few places, but it's still up there in the grate. And so, if we sort of pull it all together, maybe minus the Doppel flute, and with the board,
Yeah, with the board,
we
why
get
not?
something there. So that's the grate.
That's the grate.
It's a few stops bigger than original, but but essentially the same.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. All right, so James, let's move on to the pedal here. We'll start with the stuff that is original. Now, initially the pedal was inside the case, and then the seminary was kind enough to give up the gallery for our use. And by taking the pedal out of the case and putting it behind the organ and the gallery, it opened up quite a bit of room and allowed for expansion of the pedal division. So the 16 open diapason is slightly narrow in scale for a hook organ, but is very effective here. And because it's slightly narrower, it speaks promptly, which I have always liked. And then the Borden is also original. The Lieblich gedeckt comes from the swell, and the only reason that I would mention it here is because initially it was a tenor C stop, and we did add the bottom octave, which is very helpful in this case. Quiet, but effective.
Yeah.
Then we have, above that, we did do some additions. The 8-foot principal and the 4-foot octave were old pipes from our stock, and that is a unit that we placed to sit atop the open. So there's the 8. And the 4. And to go with the Borden, would be the Lieblich. We borrowed the Lieblich at 2 different pitches from the swell. So it comes in at 8 and 4. And 4. All right. And then, of course, any organ of this significance should have a 32-foot Borden, but we couldn't get one into the gallery, so the second best thing would be a resultant. So the 32-foot grand Borden is a resultant, but interestingly enough, the unison comes from the open diapason, and it's quinted out of the 16-foot Borden. And the reason that's important is it improves the harmonics and makes it a more effective 32.
Yep. And the rest is borrowed from the Borden.
That's correct. Yeah, works pretty good.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have a bit of a reed battery here. The reeds were added because when obviously the pedal was in the case, there was no room for a pedal reed, so it didn't have one. So we start with the backbone here, a 16-foot trombone. It gets a nice tone there.
Yeah, super.
That actually, I remember the process of doing this when it arrived from the pipe maker, and we did the voicing and then got it in here with this acoustic and realized that, wow, that's really big. So it was a kind of a fortuitous thing that happened. You weren't expecting, but there it is.
Yeah.
So then to give you another 16-foot timbre, we are borrowing the bassoon from the swell. Excellent. And then the tromba is an extension of the 16. And by extension, I should mention of the 16-foot trombone, not the bassoon.
Right.
But now, of course, you maybe would want a 4-foot. And instead of having the 4-foot as an extension of the 16 and 8 tromba, why not do it out of the bassoon? That gives you a different timbre.
Yeah, very useful. Beautiful.
That's
And it's expressive, so we can pull that back with the swell pedal as well. Yeah, gorgeous. Then we have our 32-foots. We're lucky to have 2 of those.
Oh yes, how could I forget? Yes, so the 32-foot is an extension an octave down of the 16-foot trombone. And that has an interesting provenance. You know, we were going to order an extension octave for the 16-foot trombone when we ordered that from the pipe maker, but we just so happened to learn that All Saints Ashmont in Boston was doing their Skinner project up front, and the Hutchings, which had been sort of messed about over the years, was coming out, and folks called and said, "Do you want some pipe work?" And we thought, well, do we really need? Maybe. And we went down there and like, well, wait, there's a 32-foot contra trombone in this thing.
Yep.
So we ended up getting that octave from there and
Super.
repurposing it here.
Yeah, and with all the 32, 16, and 8 reeds.
And
really good.
Yeah. And while we're at it, we might as well, oh, I don't know. And then add that again. What is that like? It's amazing, yeah. It's amazing what can happen when you're given a lot of room to expand things.
Yes.
You can just keep adding stuff, right?
Yeah.
So how about we go over to the other side
Great.
and see what's
Let's
over
do it.
here. Okay, James, well, here we are in the swell. Now, most of the swell is original with a few additions. We, again, because we got the pedal out of the organ and put it into the gallery, we were able to push back the swell a tiny bit and sort of add a bump out on the back, and that allowed for a few extra things.
Nice.
So we'll begin with the original stuff. We have a completely original open diapason at 8 feet. I love how liquid that is.
It is absolutely liquid and beautiful.
That's
yeah.
really, that's a very good example of what Hook was up to at this time.
Yep.
That was not touched at all.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it wouldn't be a Hook without a stop diapason. And of course, in this time period, the blocks were scooped, so it gives you just a really nice round sound.
Beautiful.
Lovely. 8 and 8 foot solitional.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and of course, they didn't believe in Celeste quite as much as we do nowadays, but you couldn't really not have one. So the Voix Celeste itself is brand new to go with the solitional.
Yep.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. Works very beautiful, very well together. I should say I'm closing the box at the end of all these little examples, so you're hearing the full open sound, and then as we sort of approach the top of the scale, and I'm just pulling the box back.
As you should, of course. What's at the box should always be in motion. Isn't
Exactly.
that the, So then, of course, we step up to some 4-foots. The 4-foot violina, that's the original name, is 4-foot violina. However, in this larger context of this organ now, with a bigger pedal and a few extra stops, the violina ended up being just a little too thin. And it's important to have a principally 4-foot in a swell to kind of glue it together. So this violina is original, but it got a few extra pipes at the bottom to kind of bump it up and give it a little more body.
And I imagine that combined with the stop diapason, for example, very useful for accompanying, choral voices and things like that.
And you could hear it's sort of, it's like a slightly stringy principle. Now.
Most useful kind.
Right.
Super.
And then, of course, the flute harmonique is original because it would have had one. What's interesting about that is it sounds a bit more narrow than you might expect. I mean, in the earlier days of Hook, I remember these harmonic flutes, 4-foot harmonic flutes, which are so kind of big that they have a lot of wind noise to them. But this one is a little bit narrower and a little bit tighter.
Pure tone. I imagine with the stop diapason. That's a really useful.
That's a nice sound.
Super.
I almost forgot about the 16, so we'll go back a bit. The 16 from tenor C up is completely original. And then, when we were taking out the organ, kind of piled in a dusty corner of the gallery was a random bottom octave to a 16-foot. We had no kind of idea where it came from. No one could give us any information. But we brought it back to the shop, cleaned it up, did the stoppers, put it on the machine and said, hey, this sounds pretty good. Why don't we just slap it on the side of the box and now we have a full compass 16.
Yeah, and we heard some of this in the pedal earlier.
Yes, nice.
Beautiful.
Yep. And then we get to some stops that we've added a bit. The 2-foot flautino, it didn't have a 2-foot, as would be characteristic of a meat and potatoes chant accompanying kind of smaller 2-manual. But it needs something. So a flautino here, and it should exist somewhere between a flute and a string and a, principal. Yeah, just enough.
Like where it sits, absolutely.
The mixture is, a 3-mark mixture is new. It was slightly lower pitched than the great mixture and a tiny bit less in scale. So, I'll let you kind of build it up.
Let's put a little chorus. The open diapason, the stop diapason, the violina, the flautino, and the mixture. Beautiful chorus, clean, clear.
Excellent. Yeah, works great.
Yeah.
So now we'll move on to the reeds.
Yep.
The original reed, of course, it only ever had an 8-foot oboe. And because we extended the swell box back and we took the oboe off of the main chest
Yep.
and put it on a unit chest, we could now extend it down 1 octave for the bassoon and up 1 octave for the barrow in
Yep.
the pedal. But here it is just as at 8-foot pitch. Lovely.
Yeah.
And then as a 16. And how about together? Lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, the oboe is, fairly gentle here. So you need something with a little more guts than that.
Yep.
And boy, does that 8-foot trumpet fit the bill. That's a new trumpet. It's another one of those things where you order the pipes with an idea of what you want it to do, and
Right,
then you get
right.
it into the room and go, oh my God, it's huge. But another one of those things that turned out to be an excellent, not a mistake, but an excellent happening.
Yeah.
Tuning's a little spicy up there. I would say that it is January and the school is not in session and the heat is not fully up. So now it does, the 16 being not as loud, just sits under it and gives it a little texture. Excellent.
Yeah.
So now, I don't know, maybe I'll stand out of the way and let you just sort of build up the swell all the way up. Just
Let's
to
do that.
Give a flavor.
And add the swell to pedal and maybe the board, and just to give us a little
Yeah, just to give
foundation.
something,
I'll start maybe with a the stop diapason. And just the stop diapason, the solitional, and the flute harmonique. Then the open diapason. Violina, taking off the 4-foot flute. And the oboe. And the bassoon. Flautino 2-foot. Mixture. And the trumpet. the board and...
So fairly flexible, I guess.
Extremely flexible. Repertoire, accompanying, and everything in between.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So now, if we move down to the choir, that is an entirely new division. Like I said, because we got the pedal out of the case, put it into the gallery, it opened up a space behind the grate and under the swell for a chest. And we plunked a chest there and sort of found some things to put on it. The first thing would be the Dulciana that we took away from the grate in favor of the Spitz flute, but decided that it would be excellent here. And we basically kept it the same. We gave it a touch more wind to give it just a little bit of texture. Lovely.
Yeah.
And then the rest of these things, the chimney flute was a interesting find. I can't remember exactly the provenance of that or where it came from, what organ it came from, but I do know that it has internal chimneys. So you have the cap.
Neat, yeah.
For tuning, and instead of the chimney coming out the top, it goes down in the center. So. Very nice on its own.
Yep.
But it also blends particularly well with the Dulciana to give you sort of a synthetic diapason. Oh, beautiful. Yep. And then moving into the forefoot, the Spitz principle, I believe, is new, and it's called a Spitz principle because it is a principal scaled forefoot, slightly narrow, but with a gentle taper. Now, I suppose what we could have done, you could have had a forefoot flute on the choir, which some people would argue made more sense if you're going to have a cornet décomposé.
Right.
Except when you have a division without a principal anywhere, it doesn't hold together.
Yeah.
So that's why the Spitz principle works here.
Right.
Now, the Nazard and the piccolo and the tierce, I believe, were from old stock. So we'll start with the Nazard. It's not very fat, but it's not intended to be a super fat French cornet.
Right.
And we have a piccolo. And a tierce. And that one actually is even more fluty than the Nazar.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, that's more of a true flute.
Yeah.
And then we'll get to the kind of putting it together, but then we have an 8-foot Cremona. That was originally a crumb horn from an earlier 70s or 80s Andover that was on another organ, and we decided over time that we didn't like it, or no one liked it, so we replaced it with something else, and then it sat in our stock. And then when we came to this project, it got sort of dusted off and cleaned and revoiced and turned more into a Cremona, and I think it has turned out to be pretty successful here. Add the tremolo there, yeah.
Great stop.
The tremolo's nice. On this one in particular, there's a winker to kind of support the wind in that chest to reduce the bounce. But you know, you don't want the winker acting when you have a tremolo, and some companies will put a slider in there that cuts it off. But we thought, well, what if we have a stick sort of pushing it from a pneumatic that puffs away, and that way we can get it to go really slow. So I'm particularly fond of that tremolo. And of course, I'm going to let you can mix these in any sort of way to get a whole plethora of different solo timbres.
Yep. Well, if I just take the 8-foot and the 4-foot, for example. Very clear, a perfect sort of split between a principal and a flute. It's exactly what you'd want if you were only to have one of those 4-foot on a division. If I do the 8-foot and the 4-foot and the 2-foot together, nice and bright and sparkly. We could even take the 4-foot away and just have the 8-foot and the 2-foot. Extremely charming, full of character. Maybe just the 8-foot, the 4-foot, and the Nazard. Plus the tremolo. And I did use that with the stopped arpetan, maybe in the flûte harmonique as a little. If I add the piccolo and the tierce to that, so the full cornet décomposé. For a tierce entaille effect that works beautifully as well, really stands up.
Yeah, well, you know, this division, it says choir, and kind of a later idea would be the choir would contribute more to the chorus, and it would sort of be more actually for the choir.
Yep.
This is more of an earlier version. It's unenclosed, and it is adding flexibility, solo flexibility to this organ.
Yep.
So it's helpful that way.
And I can see maybe just using the 8-foot and some of the gap registrations. This is the 8-foot and the tierce. And the 8-foot and the mansard. Great for those little colours that you're just trying to search somewhere, and there they are.
Lots of possibilities.
Truly.
So here we are up in the gallery at St. John's Seminary Chapel, and this is where the pedal division ended up. You know, we have the case of the organ and the swell, and the pedal ended up back here, where the reservoir was always in the gallery. And so we decided to move the pedal around it and shorten the winding and also give us room in the case for other things. So this 16-foot double open is original. It's just now back here. It's on its original chest, in fact. You can see it is slightly more narrowly scaled than you might expect a hook to be, and that's certainly true. But the benefit of that is it speaks a little bit faster, so it's been much appreciated. And then to add to that, of course, we added a unit, an 8 and a 4 foot principal on this new chest, which we had these pipes in our stock. I believe some of this came from an Austin, so, you know, sometimes you find stuff, good stuff anywhere. You can see the little pieces of foam on the cross members up there tying the double open together with the board, and that's because every time we'd go up there you'd bang your head. So at some point I said, I'm gluing foam there. And then of course here, right behind the swell, we put the Borden chest. And that is the original chest with some updates. So now we will go right here. We have the reed battery in the pedal. We have the 16 and 8 foot unit on its own chest. And then on a separate chest, we have the bottom octave of the 32. And those pipes, as I mentioned before, come from All Saints Ashmont, a previous organ at All Saints Ashmont in Boston. So here we have the swell. You can see the evidence of what is original swell box material and what is added on later. We did add this back to the swell, this bump out, if you will. That way we could take the 16-foot Borden and the oboe and put it on its own unit chest here. And that way it could speak at a number of pitches. You know, obviously the 16-foot octave is new for the oboe, and that means it can be used as 16 foot, and then we added some at the top so that it could go up an octave and become the 4 foot in the pedal. The 16 is all here except for the bottom octave, which you'll see on the side of the case on the outside. It is not, so the bottom octave of the 16-foot Borden in the swell is not under expression, but, you know, you have to make some sacrifices, I guess. Looking forward, we see in the very front of the chest is the brand new trumpet. So behind the trumpet there is the new 3-rank mixture, followed by the 2-foot flautino and the 4-foot violina, which you can notice is a little bigger now, and it's more of a principal scale. Then we have the 4-foot flute harmonique, and you can see at this time how narrow that was for a 4-foot flute harmonique. That gives it that lovely kind of more focused sound. Then we have the 8-foot open diapason, the 8-foot solitional, the 8-foot stop diapason, and on the back here, the celeste. And through here is how you get to the front of the swell for tuning the trumpet especially. And these here, these 6 on this side, 6 on the other, is that bottom octave of the 16-foot Borden that was not original to the organ, but that we found in a dusty pile in the gallery here, and we discovered we liked it a lot, and it would make a perfect bottom octave again for that Borden in the swell. And so here it is on a unit chest, and it's also in the pedal. It's quite effective. And so right here, this is kind of the traditional hook walk board, which is not quite big enough and not quite stiff enough, but you know, it works. And we do a lot of the tuning through the front here. I take out a few shades. It gives you better access to the trumpet and the upper work, and then whatever you can't reach from here, generally you can do from the back. Also, as you see here is the back end of the facade. You can see the inscription by Mary Lou, pipes designed and execution, Mary Lou Davis for Andover Organ Company, July 2015. She did a marvelous job. We're very proud of the job she did here. And so now, right below us is the grate, and we'll have to reverse course here and head down below the swell. So this is the only way down, one man at a time. Down we go. And so here we are under the swell. We have the grate over here and the choir over here. On the grate, we have that grate open, and then that new old pipe work, the Spitz flute, which is new to this organ, but not new pipe work. And then that wonderful Doppel flute. You can see here, of course, two mouths for plump tone. And then we have the 4-foot octave, a 2-foot, and the new 4-rank mixture. And the trumpet, if you can see beyond me, the trumpet is now on this side chest, which allowed us to put some other things in here. The pedal used to exist on the sides, and now we've populated it with the basses for some of this stuff. And then here's the brand new choir chest, which came about because now we had room for a choir. And we start in the back with that lovely Dulciana that was on the grate and now was moved to here in order to make room for the Spitz flute. And you can see it's short compass here. The basses are actually on the sides. Then we have that interesting chimney flute where the chimney goes down into the pipe instead of stick above the pipe. That's interesting. And we've got the 4-foot tapered Spitz principal. We have the Nazard. Those are old pipes, kind of large in scale. We have the 2-foot and the tierce. So the 4-foot is tapered because we wanted it to be principal to draw together the division, and then the rest of it is straight open flutes. You can see that the tierce is a bit smaller scaled, which adds a little more point to that. And then, of course, in front of it is the repurposed crumhorn as this lovely cremona. So in here, you can see what we've done to these chests are old. The grate is original chest, and so is the choir, but we've added this sort of pallet box below it, and we did plywood bottom boards as well. They would have been originally had sponsons and a covering, like a rubber cloth covering. But in this case, we felt that given it was an institution and the humidity was going to change a lot, and the fact that these chests were really a wreck before, we decided that we would do plywood bottom boards and cut new slots for the pallets. And instead of the old action, of course, the pneumatic action they had, we have done electric pull downs for this particular organ. So it's a good example of repurposing an old chest in a modern way that should, in theory, be more reliable long term and also have less things to restore when you have to restore them. You'll also notice this escape valve. After this organ went in, because it's an institution, the chapel was heating constantly, which, you know, and it's the winter and it's a school, so you have to have heat all the time. And despite all these efforts, we were still starting to have some teething problems, like everything, the bungs were drying out and things would just leak. Not mechanical failures with the organ, but we'd have more leaking of air in here and pretty much all over the organ. So in the basement, in the old blower line that came up from the basement, we installed a swamp cooler and a pump to pump humidified air, computer controlled, into the organ. And so when the organ is off, these spring valves open in here and it allows the humidified air to just come up through into all of the parts of the organ and then come out. And then when the organ is turned on, the pressure closes the valve and it doesn't leak. So you can, if you put your hand here, you can feel some very moist and cool air coming out of there. And that has really helped the organ and has made this, all the leaking dissipate.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed our video today and the tour of Hook-Hastings Opus 1833 from 1902 here in Brighton, Massachusetts. My thanks today to Ryan Bartosiewicz and Matthew Bellocchio from the Andover Organ Company for helping us get here, and to Tristan Smith for making the organ available to us, and of course to James Kennerly for his expertise in playing. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a thumbs up down below, and while you're there, remember to subscribe to the channel so you'll know when more videos are coming out. Till those videos are out, though, remember you can find streaming classical organ music on our 3 stations, organlive.com, Positively Baroque, and The Organ Experience. Until next time, I'm Brent Johnson. Thank you for watching.